We'll click this. We're live. Make sure this is happening. Oh, yeah, we're in. All right, Cos, cheers.
Hey, Mark.
Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on Beers and Careers, my man.
It's great to be here.
So Cosmo Santullo. Did I pronounce that right?
Santullo.
Santullo,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Which is Brad. When your last name's Augustinelli, you should get those right.
Yeah.
Introduced to me, and before we get into your background, Cos, and share with the group why we thought it made sense for you to come on this podcast, get some rapid fire questions we ask everyone. Do you have a favorite drink? We're on Beers and Careers, and I know you're drinking a Diet Pepsi.
Yeah, well, like everybody, I was probably a pretty good college partier when it came to the drinking days. And I have to say, since then, probably would be, I like a good red wine.
Okay.
I've finally become a little Italian. My dad would be proud of me. He's long gone, but if he saw me drinking the Barolos and the Amarones, I think he'd say, wow, the kid made it.
Yeah, exactly. He matured. That's too good. Now, do you have a favorite curse word?
No, not really. I can't think of any that people would associate with me.
There we go. That's fair. Are you a quote guy? Any quotes that come to mind or resonate with you?
It's funny. I'll give you the one that I used once at a wedding. I said, live the journey, for every destination is but a doorway to another. And I said it to my buddy and his girlfriend because life is short and we worry about where we're going. And sometimes it's the journey that's the most important. And you know who gave me that quote?
Who?
A character you probably don't know, but when my 39-year-old was 6 years old, his favorite cartoon was He-Man.
Okay.
And He-Man said that at the end of one of his shows. And I said, wow, that He-Man's a pretty smart guy.
Pretty smart guy. I love that. I love that. Do you think of that often?
I've used it, a lot of times when people talk about what they got to get done and what they got to get done, and they say, life is short, my friend.
Enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
Enjoy the ride.
That's the best part.
I love that. Our mutual connection, Bob Davis, who introduced us, he's a big live the journey kind of guy. I think one of his boats,
the fullest.
The Dash, right, was the name of his boat because that's the time in between your birth year and your death year is the Dash. He's like, that's all that matters. So,
well, and guys like he and I are thinking about it a lot more lately.
Yeah, I get it. What was your first job?
So you mean before school or anything else?
Like, the first time someone paid you to do something?
Yeah, I was a newspaper boy. I delivered the New York Post and a paper called the Herald Statesman in Westchester County, New York. My mom, by the way, lives in the same apartment I was born in Yonkers, New York still. 68 years she's been there. Wow. And from probably about age 9 to 11, I delivered newspapers, and I used to run to get them done quick so I could be with my friends. When I got to high school, I found out I was pretty fast. The track coach said, you need to run on the track team. And I didn't know I was a sprinter, but I ended up becoming a high school and college sprinter because of delivering those newspapers.
No way. Where did you go to college?
I went to school in Princeton.
Okay.
In New Jersey.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And so you just parlayed it the whole way into sprinting.
I ran it like some freshman thing in high school, and I beat what would have been the equivalent of the varsity captain's 200-meter time.
Wow.
And the track coach came over and said, you're on the track team. I didn't know what track was.
Yeah.
But you never know how one thing goes and leads to another, right?
It is the truth. It's just taking shots. Now, were you always a 200-meter guy?
200 meters. I like relays. I'm a team guy.
Yeah, okay.
So my most fun for me, not a lot of people talk track because if you don't run it, it's like swimming.
Yeah, people don't get it.
But I love the relays. Even more, I played football in high school and college, but I think track had that special.
That was your sport.
My thing, believe it or not.
No, I do. Well, I went to a local high school here that had a very prominent track team, so it was a huge team, but also well decorated. So they kind of had I don't want to say like an ego from a negative sense, but there was certainly a weight that they carried in the org. It was pretty cool. The first time I saw someone run a 400 in 53 seconds or whatever, I was like, I remember being like, wow, I didn't realize people could run that fast as a 17-year-old kid.
Yeah,
so.
They wanted me to run the quarter, but to me, it was more than a sprint. It was a lot of work. I ran it. I ran the mile relays once in a while in high school and college. But it's funny, the track thing, I got a call during COVID from the current track coach in my high school, who I never knew, who wanted to find out all about our team back in the 70s because we still held all these relay records in Westchester County, New York, which,
Wow.
as you can imagine, with schools like Mount Vernon and White Plains and New Rochelle, there's some pretty fast kids down there.
Yes.
And he said, what was it with you four guys that made you so special? And
Did
it was
you-
kind of flattering.
did you-
I said, you're the only person in 40 years to ask me about my track career. My kids don't even care.
Did you
So-
tell him to get everyone delivering newspapers?
Well, he found all these articles that he was sending to me that I sent to my family.
That's
Because I never saw any of that
What a cool
stuff.
trip down memory lane,
Yeah,
though.
it was kind of fun.
That's
Anyway,
really cool.
we don't want to talk
no,
about
that's,
track.
No,
but
we don't. But
It's just back to that first job.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you know what? Let's just start with like I know I was introduced to you as a guy who spent quite a bit of time at IBM with a big business. But can you maybe give us more of an overview of you ran track in high school and college? You went to college. What did you graduate with? And then how maybe some of your stops along your career?
Yeah,
to get
I
you
was
to
very
here?
fortunate. I had a great high school couple of coaches that told me I'd do well in a school like Princeton. And financially, my parents had no money. My dad was a self-employed butcher, and they said that if you get in, they'll take care of you. So I was lucky to go. To this day, I still know how lucky I was. I graduated as an engineer. I always loved math and science, but I grew up in Westchester County, which was the home of IBM.
Yes.
And I only interviewed with IBM out of college because I said that's probably where I belong. So I actually started in sales at IBM.
And what was your engineering degree in?
It was in industrial engineering. So
Okay.
it was kind of queuing
Yeah.
theory. I always say my job was to decide how many toll booths you need at the bridge or how quick to move people through a parking lot. So
Yes.
whenever I go to a Jet game on Sunday and the crowd's stuck in traffic, I go, I'm supposed to be able to fix this problem.
Now, when did you realize that? Were you in college when you realized I'm getting this degree, but I'm not going to use it?
Yeah, I knew, again, I knew what I enjoyed. That's why I studied math and science.
Yes.
But I knew that I wanted to make money. I knew I loved management and leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I worked at the pub at the university. I started in the cafeteria and I worked my way up. We had a pub at Princeton back then. They don't have one anymore.
yeah, very cool.
So I was the pub manager and I managed a team of student workers. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be in a leadership position somewhere. And I
Okay.
felt the way to get there wasn't engineering, but through the sales and marketing of some organization. And that's what I knew IBM was famous for. So
Right.
I had a pretty traditional, in one way, career at IBM. In 20 years, my wife and I moved 10 times.
Okay.
So every 2 years, I moved
Wow.
for a new job. So we
Wow.
own 10 homes, which doesn't happen as much anymore.
No.
But it was very non-traditional in the sense that I typically chose the path least chosen to get where I was going. IBM was very structured in what I'll call a line job, a field job, and a headquarters job.
Okay.
And so you do a field job for a few years, then you do a headquarters job, then you go back to the field and you do another field job as a manager, then a director, vice president, et cetera. I did that path, line, field, but whenever I chose a headquarters job, I chose something very different than the guys I was competing against. A lot of my friends would say, well, you got to go into marketing if you're in sales. And I said, no, I'm going to go into finance. And they go, but you're not a finance guy. I go, yeah, but if you're going to be a general manager someday, you better learn finance in IBM. Or at one time, we were a very big product company at IBM. Well, today, IBM is a very big services
Right.
company. I was one of the first field executives to go into the services business, and all my friends thought I was kind of nutty. They go, "Why would you?" Well, after I took that job and got promoted pretty quickly, they all were calling, going, "How do we get Kaz's old job?"
Wow.
Because they realized that it was a new path. So I think sometimes you have to recognize that even to do the things that you think you want to do that look very traditional, there may be new, different ways to get there.
Now, did you what was the? I'm kind of listening to you say that, and part of me is going, that's Cos reflecting to a degree about how he made those decisions. I imagine that was difficult in the beginning, like your 20-year career. Maybe in the back half, it was like, nope, I know what to do. I'm going to go get my finance or whatever. But in the beginning, when everyone's competing for that next job, where did the motivation, wherewithal come from to choose the path less traveled? Was there a mentorship? Was it really gut intuition? Like, how did you get there?
Great word. I don't think he thought of me as a mentee.
Yes.
But early in my career, there was a gentleman named Tom Esposito who I
Okay.
ended up working for 3 times in 20 years at IBM, who typically would say things like, Kaj, you should go do that.
Okay.
And I'd say, well, I thought I wanted one of these jobs. And he said, you don't need to do that. He said, you'd be really good at the marketing thing, and everybody knows. He said, go learn some new things. So I was fortunate that he looked at it and said, and he said, you'll be exposed to people that the rest of the group won't be exposed to that are competing for the next job. You can imagine at IBM, we got 5,000 sales guys now competing for 800 management jobs, then competing for 200 branch manager, regional manager, then competing for 50. And it was the same guys most of my career, who I still love today. Many I keep in touch with. But it was a very competitive environment where you had to differentiate who you were. And my mentor, let's call him that for lack of a better word, was good at calling me, and I trusted him.
Okay.
When Tom called, my wife would say, what's up? And I go, Espo wants me to go to New York and do this. And she goes, is that a good job? I go, let's give it a shot. Plus, it's confidence. You got to believe in yourself too, right?
Yes.
You got to say to yourself, I'm going to earn the right in that next position. I go in on the bottom, but
I'll figure it out.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
I'll figure it out. Of all the places you moved to, what was your favorite?
I tell everybody that Pittsburgh is the best kept secret in the United States.
Okay.
It's a big little city that I call it East Coast ethnicity with Midwest friendliness. And, I saw everything from Luciano Pavarotti to Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones in Pittsburgh. You can go to opera and you can go to rock and roll, and it's a beautiful city if you've never been there. I'm sure people think of Pittsburgh and think of the 40s and the 50s and the steel industry. But it really is a fabulous place, and the people were just special. So I always say it's my favorite spot, and people are shocked.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But
On the flip side, and this isn't the part of the podcast, but I'm just interested.
Yeah.
Where did you regret moving to?
I think I'm considered maybe overly positive. I don't ever regret any decision you make. I think you make the best of everything. And I didn't live in glamour. I lived in Scranton, Trenton, Pittsburgh, Cleveland. When I say those cities, the president of North America, IBM, I once said to him, Bob, how come I go to all these cities and my buddies go to Columbus and San Diego and Atlanta? And he looked at me and he said, Kaj, you're my fixer. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, these are cities that were once great in the old days at IBM, and they've just had some tough times. He goes, and you're the kind of guy that I know goes in there, and whether it's the, manager at the candy store or the CEO of the bank, they seem to connect to you. And that's what I need in that city, is I need the young and the old to realize we're going to have to change.
Connect.
So it was a compliment in a way.
Yeah.
But they weren't the prettiest places in the world.
But enthusiasm is quite a skill. It is.
And I think honesty in people knowing that you did what you did because you cared about them. They used to joke that I was a fast track career guy and just moving through the city for 2 years and I'd be gone. But the people that got to know me best knew that when I was there, that was my home.
Yes.
I made it my home in every way I could.
Yeah. You were taking it day by day there.
Yeah.
Not looking forward.
Making the best of it.
Yeah, living the journey, as we might say.
Exactly.
Now, can you share about what your role was at IBM? Because I know that was like the vast majority of the chunk of your career, and like what were you?
Well, I started.
I mean, you had obviously many roles, but
I started knocking on doors.
Yes.
I did jobs where I was an executive assistant to a very senior executive, had to advise him on all kinds of things that were going on in the business and speeches he was putting together.
Wow.
I did organizational jobs where I helped us restructure. IBM was always restructuring. But sales management, branch management, regional management. I ran the state of Ohio for IBM when there were basically about 50 of us running the United States for IBM.
Wow.
And I lived in Japan for 2 years with IBM in Tokyo, and I ran an industry for all of Asia Pacific. And then last, I ran the personal computer business in North America for IBM when I left. So I went from being a single employee to having probably about 6,000 employees when I ran the PC business out of Raleigh.
Wow.
And that's ironically when I left IBM. So,
okay, yeah.
Well,
through that amazing change of being a single employee to having 6,000 folks on, like, what didn't change about your?
I hope when I went back to Yonkers, New York, my high school and grammar school buddies still thought I was Cos.
Yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And some of them actually said that. They go, "God, we're real proud of you. It sounds like you've had a great career," but they'd still invite me to play poker on Friday night.
Yeah. You didn't want to lose that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope that's still who I am to this day.
I love that. When you got to IBM, I think the IBM had such a cultural influence at the time too, right? You said I only interviewed at one place.
Yeah.
And was it a job at any point in time, or what? From day one, were you like, "This is my career"?
No, it's really interesting that the structure in IBM that was very powerful in the 80s was something called the branch office. So branch office was 100 to 300 people. In New York City, there may have been 20 branches, one for banking, one for media. But in cities like Pittsburgh, there were two of us,
right.
Or in cities like Omaha, there was one branch office. And I went to work in Princeton, New Jersey, right out of school there. And the branch manager pulled me in his office and said, "What do you want to do in 5 years?" First time I met him. And I said, "I want your job." And he laughed and he goes, "Well, what makes you think you do my job?" And I said, "Because I think I'd be really good at running an office of 100 people and being successful." So he says, "Well, you got a few things you got to accomplish before that." Ironically, 2 years later, I received a commission check, which I still have, for $2.71, when the average commission check was in the thousands. And I thought about leaving IBM. I didn't think I could sell.
Interesting.
And that same branch manager called me in the office and he said, Cos, Bernie knows you can do it, who was my boss. I know you can do it. We don't think you believe you can do it. And he said, until you do, it's not going to change.
Wow.
And so it wasn't the easiest times. But I then went and had 36 months of making my objective, moving out of that job and moving on, and actually became one of the younger managers in the company a couple of years later.
Right.
So
even with a slow start, so
right.
to speak.
To this day, George Gagel, it's funny how I haven't said that name in 30 years, first challenged me the first day I was on the job and then challenged me 2 years later that the only thing in my way was me.
It's interesting because I think I'm technically a millennial, and I think even the younger generations, it's very different. The 20-year employee is not as much of a common thing in today's day and age. Look, I'm in staffing, right? So I move people all the time, but at the end, but I also think there's you talk to some people, especially young people, let's say less than 10 years of career experience, and they're bouncing from job to job, not the right fit. It's hard. I'm struggling here. And I had a similar moment where I remember I was at my parents' dining room table. I was working here. I was about 18 months into the sales job. And my dad goes, "How's it going?" And I'm like, "I don't think I'm going to make it."
Right.
Like, I don't know. And I don't know exactly what he said, but I remember leaving the dinner table going with the thought process of him being like, "Things take time. Like things don't just happen in this immediate gratification world you're used to." And the next 6 months were the best 6 months I had. And then from there on, it was like I got the confidence where it was less of a job for me because it wasn't just a paycheck, and it was more like, okay, what I put into this, I'm going to get out of it, and it became more of a career. So I find that really interesting because although we're on a podcast documenting people's career paths changing, sometimes the change isn't necessarily a new company name or a new manager, but it's a new skill set or tackling a problem you have in a current role.
And each time you change jobs, I used to say, when I moved into a new position, I looked around the room and all my idols were in the room because they were the people I wanted to be someday.
Yes.
And now I realized I was the worst of the group. And the most flattering thing to me was a year or two later when Joe Wignott, another name I haven't said, who was the branch manager in Harrisburg, and I was in Pittsburgh, came to me and said, "Cos, what did you do on that project last month? I heard about it, and it sounded fabulous how you solved that problem." And I'm saying to myself, Joe Wignott's asking me for my advice.
Right.
And I realized, gee, I had made it.
Yes.
At that level.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you kind of get there over time by earning the right. You're not there in the beginning. My first line management job, they did an employee opinion survey, and IBM was real tough. And I had all employees that were much older than me, and they tore me apart in the opinion survey after 6 months. And I remember I said, I must have had the worst management survey in the company. And you have to then meet with your group employees and ask them how you can do better. And it's a
Wow.
long story.
Wow.
I'll bore you with the story. I won't bore you with the story, but the net of it is they all laughed and joked and said, Kaz, you're not that bad a guy, but this is Scranton, Pennsylvania, and we're an old coal town, and we don't like management. We like you because you're Kaz, but we don't like you because you're the manager.
No
but
way.
when I left 2 years later, they actually presented me with a plaque that it's one of the few things I've kept today it's a story I'll tell you offline someday.
Yeah, really
But it was
cool.
really the ultimate compliment that to the guy who had made it in the town that is very cynical of new people coming to our town and telling us what to do.
Right. Oh.
So there were, to answer your question originally, were there moments? There were moments every time you changed jobs.
Yes.
You started over again within an organization, and you had
Yeah.
to respect that.
Yeah. Did that feeling ever get normal when you jump to a job? Say you jump to your fifth or sixth, you're like, oh yeah, this is that normal 90-day haze.
No, I would say it got normal after the third or fourth.
After the third, fourth
move
one,
because
yeah.
I kind of understood the system and I knew the players, and that's what was wonderful about IBM. You were always learning. When I left IBM, I remember a lot of people saying, we love grabbing former IBMers. We actually like getting them once removed from IBM because sometimes they first come out and they're so used to being
Structure.
the support system of IBM.
Okay.
We like to see them go out there and fail for a while, and then we love hiring them because their knowledge is so strong, but they need to see what the real world's like. And I kind of went through the same experience. So
Okay. Interesting.
It helped.
Yeah.
It helped kind of seeing the world one way when you first get out, and then realizing what you do know and don't know.
Right. So you end your time at IBM in the personal computer business. How's that wind down for you?
Yeah, I leave after 20 years because to me, I was about performance, not politics.
Yes.
And I realized I moved for 20 years because I was the best at what I did each time. And as you get closer to the top, it's who you play golf with and who you go skiing with and who you drink with. And I went home on the Friday night and wanted to go to my kid's basketball game.
Yeah.
And I wanted to coach my kids' sports, and my job was my job. And I remember when I left, I told the head of North America, I said, John, I'm not political. And he goes, Kaz, you think I am? And he wasn't at all either. And I said, it's just time for me to go do something else. So I ended up going to another technology company called EMC out of Boston, a large storage company.
We're very familiar with them around these parts.
Right here in Hopkinton. And I was senior vice president of marketing for EMC.
Okay.
But culturally, it was a very different company. It was a great sales company, different, not to say anything bad or good, but different values, I think, than IBM had. I believe strongly in the IBM value system. And I stayed there a year, and then I got a chance to run a startup in Woburn, Massachusetts, and that was '99.
Okay.
And everybody was going to
wow.
the internet startup craze.
Yeah.
So I became CEO of a 50-person engineering firm. So I went from the big PC business to running a startup for a small salary and a little piece of stock. And, and we competed against a company called Akamai, which became very successful here in Boston.
Yes.
The CEO of Akamai was my old boss from IBM.
Wow.
So it was really interesting that he and I would be at all these banking roadshows at, Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs, and they'd have each of us get up for 15 minutes and talk about our product. His company was worth $20 billion. The stock was really hot. We were still a private company developing technology. And he was always polite to me off camera or off stage. He'd say, Cosmo, you're not going to beat us. And I'd say, George, we'll be okay. You'll be okay. There's plenty of business out there for both of us. So one of my idols became my competitor for a while. And we had it was fun for me to learn that other extreme of business. But 2001, the planes hit the World Trade Center, as you remember, and it changed a lot of that whole startup hype that was going on in the world.
It did.
So I did that for 2 years, ran a startup. We had some excitement. People thought we were going to be billionaires. I just wanted to run the company and make it successful. But that's when I left that world.
Did you struggle? I'm always curious did you how do I phrase this correctly? I love rules, but I love to break them. Okay, but I like people to tell me what the field is that I have to play on, but I'm not necessarily going to listen to all the rules. Did you find it difficult coming from such a structured world of IBM where the rules were set to a degree, and then you're in a startup where now you're the guy responsible for the rules?
I was just ready. That's why I left IBM. I used to joke that I couldn't take a $100 price action for the personal computer at IBM in September when I was watching Dell and Compaq come out there and be more competitive. And I had to go to 6 CFOs within IBM to get this price decision. And I knew it was the right thing to do. So I think
autonomy for you was the big driver.
For me, it was time. I wanted to earn the right. I remember I got hired years later, just to fast forward, because there were a lot of startups I ran. I ran a small public company as CEO. We could talk about who you are and what you do. It's very important to me, the difference. But I finally realized who I was towards the end of my career. Didn't want to worry about, competing for a big job just because it was there. Wanted to do what I was good at. And I went to become the head of sales and services for a company called BMC. So all these 3 letters. BMC is a software company.
You're calling.
BMC Software was out of Houston. We were a $2 billion software company.
Whoa.
I had 3,000 people in my organization. So although most people have never heard of them, we're a big software company. We're top 10 in the United States.
Wow.
And I remember when I went there, just thinking about this is really where I belong. And I said to the CEO when he interviewed, I said, this is what I'm good at. And he goes, that's what I need. I said, well, then let me do my job. And if I don't, fire me. And I said, because he was there from originally being a salesman. So I had heard that he just micromanages. So I said, Bob, my only thing, I'm not going to take this job. You don't need me here. You're going to pay me a lot of money.
Yeah, don't tell me what to do.
Leave me alone.
Yeah.
And if I don't do what you need me to do, fire me.
Yes.
That's your prerogative.
Yes.
And he said, as a matter of fact, once in a while we were talking, because we had to let a lot of people go. And I remember he came to me and he said, I'm not telling you what to do, but there's this one guy. And I said, Bob, you're the CEO.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, I remember what we said during the interview. So it stuck with him as much as it stuck with me.
Interesting.
That, I wanted to make sure I was the right guy, and if I was, that was the problem you needed to solve, then trust me, give me enough time to do it. And that's the most fun, the most rewarding, especially when you're, the most proud I am in my life was that BMC job. I developed a group of vice presidents that went on and made much more money than I ever made in my life leaving. I left that company and retired, semi-retired. They all left and went on and did great things.
Wow.
And to this day, I get calls from them, and it's the greatest feeling in the world to know that you were able to develop a young executive that goes on and blows away your career.
Did you have to hire most of those people? Were some of them there?
Yeah, so when I got there were 33 vice presidents in my organization. When I left, there were 13. Because it was way inflated. We had just bought a lot of companies, and we had too many. My predecessor did not step up to restructuring the organization. And unfortunately, I'm a generation that grew up during restructuring, the 80s and the 90s. And then going into 2000s, I had to right size. That's my career skill. But I had to do more with less. I got there were 3,000 people. I left, there were 2,000 people. But they were retrained. They were better at what they did, and we generated $500 million more than the 2 years prior.
Wow.
So the same thing with my management team. Of the 13 that were there when I left, 10 were part of the original 33. So I was a big believer in giving the people there a chance. They were all in different jobs than when I got there. I found out what I thought was best in their skill or missing in their talents and tried to help them with that. And then I only brought in a couple of people. Matter of fact, it was the only time in my life I ever hired someone from IBM. In all the years I had been with IBM and out of IBM, I hired a woman to run my channels business, because back in the days of the 90s, I remember how talented she was, and I asked a headhunter to go find her for me.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, but I
shout out headhunters, by the way.
There you go. But I built that team from the team that was there, and I think they appreciated that. As a matter of fact, most of them had a career there, and when I left, half of them left within the next year, and a couple told me they walked into the CEO's office and said, if Kaz isn't here, we don't want to be here anymore. And that was the greatest form of flattery.
Yeah, that's quite a compliment. I'm very interested as a leader, and I think there are people who listen to this podcast that are very interested in leadership. How you said it. You said, I looked at those people and I figured out what they were really good at. How do you go about, maybe at a high level, assessing talent, giving feedback, and coaching and developing to create that team? Because it's one thing to look back on it and be like, it was the best accomplishment of my career. That's a challenging job, and it's because it's not tangible. It's not like I got to make this iPad screen bigger.
Right.
It's very much you're working with what you got. So I'm interested in your philosophy of how you lead and manage that way.
Yeah, the best example again would be this BMC
Yes.
software company
Yeah.
because they had acquired about 10 other companies. So they were a hodgepodge of businesses. And my first 90 days there, I said, all the vice presidents were telling me what was wrong.
Yeah.
And I said, guys, no disrespect, but if you knew what was wrong, why didn't you all fix it?
Right.
So I said, I'm going to go out and ask the people. I went around the world, literally around the world, and just sat and did round tables. And in the round tables, I didn't just invite my organization. If I was in London, I invited finance people and manufacturing people and whatever. And I'd say, Mark, how long have you been with BMC? And what do you think, we're doing well or not? And when I got back, my management team was terrified because they said,
bet.
what did he learn?
Right.
You know?
He looked under the covers.
That's right. He was asking these people. They don't know anything, you
Right.
know? But I said, I've got to believe that they're the closest to the customer. And my instincts may be wrong, but my IBM culture always taught me respect for the individual and customer excellence. And I said, so I trust our people and I trust that the customers know what they want. So we started talking about organization. We started talking about what we could do better. I guess what I'm answering your question by saying, Mark, is that I didn't focus on my 11 executives or my 30 executives first.
Yeah.
I focused on the job I needed to accomplish. We needed to make this company profitable again. We needed to get more efficient. We needed to drive new products. So I looked at the strategy that I was hired to create, and I said, if we all get around that, and I think they learned from me by watching kind of my priority.
Yeah.
And that my priority was the people, the customer, and then how to go ahead, whether it was the federal government team in Washington or the Italian team in Rome, how the uniquenesses of the federal team versus the Italian team had to be considered, and we had to trust local management
To do that.
for some of the things but within what I called flying in formation.
Yes.
I mean, you couldn't be haphazard. You had to have these roles, and they had to accomplish these things. You had to have these processes, and you had to have these measurements. And if you had those three things, then you can, within your own culture and organization. And I think over time, from a group of leaders, I remember my number 2 guy, who was kind of my sales ops guy. He walks in my office the first day and he goes, Kaz, I'm your sales ops guy. I take care of everything for you. You don't have to worry about anything. And I go, well, Bill, that's great, but I'm going to take care of everything from now on because that's why I was
that's my
hired.
job.
And he looked at me like, well, I got to tell you, Mark, 6 months later, and to this day, he's one of my closest friends in the world because he absorbed what I just described, and then he responded to it.
Yeah.
So he could come in my office on a Tuesday night, and I'd say, Bill, I was thinking about this thing with our inside sales team. It doesn't make sense. You remember what they were doing in Paris when you and I were there last month? And there was some creative things going on. The next day he would walk in my office with a 10-page PowerPoint presentation about how to replicate that model. So I sat there and I said, my God, this guy is smart.
Yes.
And
he wants it.
But I helped him take his knowledge and apply it differently, I think.
Yes.
I remember the woman that ran education for me. She walked in and said, here's our kickoff for how we're going to train our salespeople. And it was PowerPoints and whatever. And I go, Kath, we're not doing that. And she looked heartbroken. She goes, but Kath, that's how we do it every year. I go, well, guess what? I wasn't hired because the way we do it every year works.
Right.
I said, Kath, we need to go out there and do something different. We need to think differently about how we train our salespeople. And when I left, I thought she'd be so happy that ding dong, the witch is dead when I left the company.
Yes.
She walks in my office crying. I remember, and I go, Kath, what's wrong? And she goes, I'm going to miss you. She goes, I was never better than I was working with you. And I go, Kath, I'm shocked. I said, you must have gone home at night and said to Mike, she goes, oh, I went home. I go, I hate that son of a bitch.
Yeah, exactly.
He's right,
exactly.
but I hate that son of a bitch.
She
said, she goes, so, together we figured out a better way. She goes, you made me better at what I did. So that's the long-winded answer to how did the executives learn? I think I didn't consciously, there were people I spent more attention to.
Right.
My best guy used to call me and say, you never call me. And I go, call Tom in Asia, ask him how often I call him. And he goes, why do you call him all the time? I go, how's Tom doing? He goes, he's having a tough year. I go, how you doing? He goes, I'm having a great year. I said, why do I call Tom?
Exactly.
I said, this is not
read,
hard.
Read between the lines. But I know you said you kind of gave me a long-winded answer, but I heard you modeled the behavior you wanted. I think you trusted your mission the whole way through, and then your model employees kind of rose to the occasion. Is it kind of what I heard?
Yeah, and they figured out. This one guy that ran North America for me went on, and he lives right now in a piece of property that's the old Nixon estate in San Clemente. He just retired, very, very successful. He used to call me every couple of months and paid me the ultimate compliment about 4 years ago. He'd always call me and say, let's put the team back together. Go take a job. You're too young. You have too much energy. And I'd say, Craig, I'm done. Life is short. But he called me once and he said, I was struggling with this thing. And I remember I came home and I turned to my wife and I said, what would Cos do? And I said, Craig, that's the ultimate compliment. He said, Cos, I can't tell you how many times I said that to myself.
Right.
What would Cos do?
Right. It's incredible.
So hopefully that's how you teach.
Goosebumps. Yeah, it's the way to do it. And I think when we get in business environments, more I don't know why it's less than sports teams to a degree. I know you got an athletic background, but in athletics, it's very easy to not want to do what everyone else is doing and fit in because you're so hell bent on winning. And in business, I think there's a don't break the status quo. And it sounds like you in all of your places that you had to go to was like, well, it's not working.
Yeah.
Which is like a funny thing to remind people of, but difficult. It's difficult for them to hear that.
Yeah. Well, when you go to Scranton, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, you're not going to the fastest growing city. And, when I went to Cleveland, Columbus was the booming city.
Right.
Cleveland was the has-been city. And everybody would tell me how great they were. And I go, I'm sure you were.
Yes.
But guess what? We're not there right now.
Right.
So we got to do something different.
Let's be humble about it. Yeah. No, I love that. Now, can you referenced it, and I want to hear you talk about the who you are, what you do piece, because you that was really clear the way you said it. So I'm guessing you have some more context around that.
When you're at IBM, you're in this fast track. Everyone wants to get to the next job, maybe be CEO, whatever. I have a few buddies that I think should have been from my group that never got the chance. One of them's still working today. He's one of the top guys at Salesforce.com.
Wow.
And like a brother. I mean, was at my wedding. And,
very cool.
I've known him forever. We're in Japan together. And it's interesting because he's still a sales executive at Salesforce. He was one of the first guys Mark Benioff hired in the organization. And I think about this. He was a CEO twice. I was a CEO 3 or 4 times. Most recently, the last job I did. But I'm not a manufacturing guy. I'm not a finance guy. And depending on the problem that company needed, maybe I was the right CEO, maybe I wasn't the right one. But I had an opportunity to run a company in California where I wasn't the right CEO. They told me they had a sales problem. They had a product problem. And I realized after 9 months and commuting back and forth from Boston every Friday and Sunday that it was not the right job. And actually, the Wall Street Journal wrote an article about CEO burnout, and they quoted me and a friend of mine in it. And I wasn't really burned out. He was more burned out. I was just realizing more. I was burned out with the travel, but I was realizing that I'm a field executive. I'm a customer executive. And I did the CEO thing for a while. But when I interviewed at BMC with the CEO, he said to me, how do I know you don't want my job? He was a little threatened, a little bit younger than me. I said, Bob, I want to come here, fix your sales organization, fix your service organization, make a lot of money, and I'm done after that. I said, I have no desire to run your business. I said, I know I can fix the problems you have, and that's what I'm good at. So who you are, sometimes you come to grips with, what I did for a while was I was a CEO.
Yes.
Who I am is I'm a field guy. I'm a sales guy.
Yeah.
And by the way, my mother cried when I became a salesman in 1978 out of college, out of college, because I was the kind of kid that the Little League used to ask you to go sell stickers to, and I never
did.
I never knocked on anybody's door. Now I think I was a good salesman because I asked my father for $20 and he bought all 20.
Exactly.
So I was a volume salesman.
Exactly.
But I hated selling. I knew when I joined IBM I didn't want to knock on doors, and I had to for a couple of years. I knew that leadership was where I wanted to be, and management, So that's the who you are.
Yeah, I like that.
You do, I think.
I liked it. Was that time when you left that company that thought they needed sales and needed
Right.
product. Was that when you realized who you are? Was that the moment or before that?
It was exactly that. No,
Okay.
it was exactly that because there were other CEO
Yeah.
search firms were calling me, the Heidrichs and Struggles and Russell Reynolds were calling me and going, Kaz, we're placing your buddies at CEO
right.
of this, CEO of that. I go, that's not what I want.
Interesting.
I said, I want to go do what I'm really good at, and I want to change a business for somebody. So I was 48 years old. I was far from done. I was at the peak of probably my earnings.
Yes.
And I was able to do that.
No, it's very cool, though.
I had a very good financial success for those few years.
Well, and you're enjoying the journey part, right? The living that part, you enjoy it so much more.
Yeah.
When you're
and
not.
again, those are the people I remember to this day because I saw the change in them. You know?
Yes. So, as a guy who's been in small companies, big companies, well-established startups, like I know you've got kids. So, but say we play a game and you've got a new grad, a fresh 23, 24-year-old. What advice would you give them about where they're starting their career and things to consider? How would you approach that early on, knowing what you know today?
Yeah. They don't have to be 22 or 23. They're 39 and 32, and we still have these conversations. And again, I'm not picking on my kids. I love my boys and my daughter, and they're all very successful, very bright, fabulous human beings. But as you said before, I think the generations are different. I feel like people today are really looking for what makes them happy.
Yeah.
I remember I looked for what pays the bills.
Yeah.
How do I feed my family?
Yes,
I came from an immigrant's parents who had nothing, and I believed in myself, but I didn't know where I was going. I'm still not sure I know where I'm going, But I tried to. I remember my son when he graduated college here in Boston. He was interviewing with a Highland Partners, a private equity group, and I remember talking to him about situational fluency, which is something I actually teach in sales training, and I've done consulting and lecture stuff. And it's something very obvious, but whether you're 20 or 70, you can enjoy the topic. Situational fluency is kind of the subject of my son is who he is, and Highland Partners were who they are. But he's going to have 3 different interviews. Each situation that he talks, one's with the CEO, one's with the CFO, and one's with the head of HR. And I would say to him, CJ, how do you plan on talking about yourself when you're with the CEO? How do you plan on talking about yourself when you're with the head of HR? And he'd say, Dad, what do you mean? And I said, let's talk about those people. And I won't tell you the whole story now, but I will sometime. I actually told Bob the story. And my son, and I described him in each of those interviews. And he said, Dad, you just described me better than I can describe me. I said, no. Nobody can describe you better than you can describe yourself. You just need to stop and think about what made you successful, whether it was playing sports or running for an office in high school or your friendships or whatever happened to you at college. And at this stage right now, the people want to know what makes you tick. And they're going to figure out how to apply that to their business.
Right.
So those 3 executives you're interviewing with today have their way of interviewing. HR kind of likes to hear your resume.
Yes.
The finance guy wants to know that you read the Wall Street Journal, that you know how to look at companies because he's the guy picking you for a specific job. And the CEO was an old friend of mine, coincidentally.
Yeah.
And as an alum of my son's university. And I said, he's not going to care about anything except
who you are.
I said, you know what his first question is going to be? He says, what? I said, how's your dad?
Right.
And then he's going to say, have you been to a basketball game at school? Because you know.
Yeah,
I said,
exactly.
And he just wants to help you relax and get ready.
Right.
Well,
to find out who the real you is.
Right.
Yes.
Situational fluency.
Yes.
So
makes a lot of
I
sense.
think it's that simple sometimes is to get them to relax and think about they've done this so many times before without even realizing it. And now in the business world, just give the people a chance to get to know who you are.
Do you feel like I love that situational fluency, by the way. I might need to grab you offline just to
We'll do it.
how
It's
to
fun.
how to share. Yeah, that's fun. Because I think great salespeople have that trait innately, but it's definitely something you can learn.
Well, and it's harder in the world today because another topic I talk about is consensus selling. When I learned how to become a salesman, they said, does the person have money, authority, right?
Yeah,
All those
yeah,
rules.
yes.
Well, guess what? There is no the person anymore. Everything is a consensus.
Everything, yeah.
So no matter what you're selling, you're going to go through 3 or 4 personalities that have to buy into the same concept that you're trying to sell to the one.
Right.
So each situation needs to be different. So
Right.
you're selling the same product to the same company, but you got to.
They
So I
perceive
think
different
it's
value
harder,
based on their role.
It's harder for your salespeople than it
Yes.
was for me 20 years ago.
That makes sense. That makes a ton of sense. Do you think that, maybe this is a little too philosophical, but I'll ask you, do you think that like that we talked about the generational differences and people are focused on happiness, and that certainly has to do with the wealth of our country is in a different spot in times past. But do you feel like searching for happiness may be the wrong way to go about it? Because I don't think I ever approached it as happiness. I was the same way. I was like, when I get my job, I was like, I get the fuck out of my parents' house. that was the main goal. It's like, I need to make money to support a lifestyle that I would envision for my soon-to-be family one day.
Right.
And I feel like through the pursuit of things that maybe are more selfish or very tangible at times, you kind of stumble in. You said it. You were like, I figured out who I was at 48 in terms of your role in the business community.
Right.
And I feel like too oftentimes people are chasing that when in reality the path to get there it can be a very different one most of the time. Do you feel similarly about that? Like, how do you think about
Well,
that?
I feel like you asked a couple of questions.
I did. I'm sorry.
Well, I'll go to the happiness one first. I don't think there's anything wrong with prioritizing happiness in your life. I think that's
Amen. Yeah.
fabulous, And it's funny, I was driving here and I heard Stairway to Heaven,
Yes.
which was the last song I played before I walked out on the football field every game in high school and college. And the last words I wrote in my high school and college yearbook. And people would say, well, you're religious? I said, no. To me, Stairway to Heaven was, how do you live your life to satisfaction, to be the best you can be, to be happy, right? That was my Stairway to Heaven, right? Thinking about, you got one shot at this thing, what do you do with it? So I respect and admire, I'll call it your generation and those younger for wanting to be happy all
That
the
a
time.
priority,
Yeah,
yeah.
And like you said, they may have more of the means, although it's tougher economically
Yeah,
in
you're right,
some ways.
you're
There's a
right.
real irony there.
Yeah, there is. I know when I said that, I was like, well, that's actually not true.
Yeah, happiness for me was the second comment I made, being the best you could be. I think I just always had an innate feeling that if someone could do it, I could do it. Why not? If you could be the starting defensive end and I'm a freshman, I'm going to
take your job.
I'm going to go after that job. Or if you're going to be the regional manager in the state of Ohio, why can't I be the regional manager in the state of Ohio? And what do I want to do along the way, live the journey, so that I develop myself broadly, but I enjoy doing it. I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy working, but I didn't think about happiness. It came from being the best I could be.
Right.
I think the reward for me was I wasn't the fastest guy in the world. I could have been faster probably if I worked harder in college, but I knew where I kind of fit among the teammates, and that was important to me.
Yeah, but one thing I feel like you've has been a theme has been goal setting, and I would just narrow it down to drive. You seem like a very driven person. Where does that come from? Is that your dad running the butcher shop, or your mom? Like, was that a family trait?
I joke lately that I only have 2 switches. I'm either on or off.
Yeah.
And my buddies have been trying to get me back to work. I have a few private equity friends. And I go, I don't want to work 18 hours a day. And they go, you don't have to. I go, you know me too well.
Yes, you can't do it.
I ran a startup it's not a startup. It was a private company in how long ago was it now? 2018 for a short while for a friend of mine. And he flew me down to Texas, and I was the CEO, and we sold the company in 9 months, which was his goal, bringing me in to help him sell it. But he gave me this whole pitch on how I could come down 2 days a week. Well, he knew once I got down there, I got a car, I got an apartment, and I never went to sleep.
Right.
Right. So I think, whatever I've always done, it comes from the energy that I was born with. My dad had a simple life. He was very happy. He didn't work very hard because he didn't have a skill. He could only do a certain thing, certain hours a day. He had dinner with us every night, and he was very, very happy in his world because he came from, he was a child from ages 8 to 12 during World War II, running from the Americans and then the Germans
Right.
during the war.
Right.
So his life simplicity was a family.
Different
right?
world, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm only one generation from that.
Right.
So I think for me it was drive was what came just naturally, and competitiveness. I was in a world, IBM made that the best. And again, college, I went to a Catholic high school where
Yes.
all boys, pretty competitive. And then I was fortunate to go to Princeton, where I was probably the dumbest guy in the school.
Right.
Although all my buddies think they were. So we joke to this day that which one of us was the dumbest guy in the school. So that's where drive comes
Yeah.
from, right? You put yourself in situations beyond your
Yes,
ability.
you make yourself the underdog even when you may not be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's always been my situation.
I love that. I love that. Cos, I really appreciate you coming on. Any final words you'd want to leave with the audience? It's been fun.
Well, I got to tell you, as you know, I know your founder, and he's a very special guy, and I love being around him and his family. And things I hear about this company are just exciting and fun, and it sounds like people love being here and love being a part of it. And I'm just flattered that you guys asked me to chat a little bit, and it's fun for me because, as I said, I've been retired a couple of years, so. Once in a while, there's somebody that cares about hearing.
No, I love
Maybe
it.
even my kids will listen to
Yes,
a few minutes
well-
and go, "Oh yeah, we heard that story 50 times." But thank you. I enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for carving out the time, and we loved having you on. Thanks for the kind words, and let's stay in touch. I think we got some sales learning to do on our end here. So
I'd love doing it.
appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Cos.
Thank you.